The heart monitor flatlined. A suffocating silence fell over the Bellevue Hospital intensive care unit. Dr. Alan Peterson stepped out of room 412, removing his surgical mask, his face pale. "She is dead," he whispered. He didn't expect the billionaire in the bespoke suit to drop to his knees. He certainly didn't expect the reinforced hospital walls to violently crack, the fluorescent lights to shatter into sparkling dust, or the ambient temperature to plummet to freezing. The king had just lost his mate, and hell was about to break loose. Chloe Henderson never belonged in the dark, predatory world of the elite, let alone the hidden, blood-soaked society of the immortal. She was a 26-year-old woman who owned a modestly successful, flour-dusted bakery in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. She was famously known in her neighborhood for two things: her divine cinnamon brioche and her unabashed, radiant confidence in a body that society constantly told her she should shrink. Chloe was a size 22. She had a soft, prominent belly, thick thighs that rubbed together when she walked, and arms that held the comforting plumpness of someone who tasted her own buttercream. For years, she had navigated a world designed for smaller people, squeezing into tight subway seats, dealing with the unsolicited diet advice of doctors, and enduring the invisible judgments of strangers. But she loved herself. She loved her softness, and to the absolute shock of the New York supernatural underground, so did Darius Kensington. Darius was a legend whispered about in the shadowed alleyways of Wall Street and the penthouse suites of Manhattan. To the mortal public, he was the elusive, ruthless CEO of Kensington Global, a venture capital firm that devoured failing businesses. To the immortal world, he was the king of the eastern seaboard vampires. He was a creature of terrifying power, sculpted from centuries of violence, marble cold and utterly merciless. Their meeting had been an accident of real estate. Kensington Global had purchased the block containing Chloe's bakery. Darius had personally arrived to deliver eviction notices, intending to raise the building for luxury condos. But the moment he stepped into the warm, sugar-scented air of Chloe's confections, the king froze. It wasn't just her scent, a dizzying blend of vanilla-warm yeast and a rich, intoxicatingly sweet bloodline that sang to his predatory instincts. It was her. When Chloe stepped out from the back, wiping flour from her apron, her cheeks flushed. Darius felt his dead heart stutter. Where other vampires sought out the waifish, fragile aesthetics of runway models, Darius found himself utterly mesmerized by Chloe's abundance. To a creature made of hard angles, cold stone, and endless hunger, Chloe was a hearthfire. She was life itself, plump, warm, soft, and vibrant. He didn't evict her. Instead, he courted her with a terrifying, overwhelming intensity. He bought her rare imported chocolates, flew her to Paris for dinner, and worshipped every curve and roll of her body with a devotion that bordered on religious. He kissed her stretch marks like they were sacred maps. He buried his face in her soft stomach and found the only peace he had known in 400 years. But their fairy tale was violently derailed 3 weeks ago. It started with a simple bruise. Chloe had bumped her hip against a counter. Usually it would leave a faint yellow mark, but this bruise blossomed into a horrific, deep purple contusion that covered her entire thigh. Then came the exhaustion. The vibrant woman who could knead dough for hours suddenly couldn't lift her arms. Darius panicked, rushed her to Bellevue Hospital, utilizing his immense wealth to secure the entire top-floor VIP wing. He brought in the best hematologists and oncologists in the country. Chloe was hooked up to a terrifying array of machines, her beautiful soft arms dotted with IVs and medical tape. The hospital gowns never fit her properly, leaving her feeling exposed and humiliated. A reality that enraged Darius so much, he had custom silk gowns tailored and rushed to the hospital within hours. "I look like a pincushion, da," Chloe whispered one evening, her voice raspy. She was sinking into the pristine white pillows. She had lost weight, but not in a healthy way. Her skin was ashen, her face swollen from the aggressive steroids they were pumping into her veins. Darius sat beside her, his large, cold hands gently enveloping hers. "You look like the most beautiful creature to ever grace this earth," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. His eyes, usually a terrifying icy gray, were dark with suppressed panic. "You are going to be fine. I am moving mountains, my love. I will buy this hospital. I will buy the pharmaceutical companies. You will not leave me. It's just, I'm so tired," she confessed, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I don't think my body can fight this." It wasn't leukemia. It wasn't aplastic anemia. Darius knew what it was, but he couldn't prove it. The symptoms, the rapid cellular breakdown, the inability of her blood to clot, the faint, acrid smell of burnt rosemary on her breath, were the hallmarks of a highly illegal, ancient, supernatural poison. Someone in his court had poisoned his human mate. Dr. Alan Peterson, the chief of oncology at Bellevue, was a man of science. He was a 50-year-old veteran of the medical field, a man who had delivered devastating news 1,000 times. But dealing with Darius Kensington was an entirely entirely different nightmare. "Mr. Kensington," Dr. Peterson said, adjusting his glasses nervously in the hallway outside room 412. The air around the billionaire always felt unnaturally cold, heavy with a static charge that made the hair on the doctor's arms stand up. "We've run the bone marrow biopsies. We've done the toxicology screens. The results are baffling. It presents like acute hemophagocytic lymphohistiocytosis, but her macrophages are attacking healthy tissue at a rate I've never documented. Her organs are beginning to shut down." "Fix it," Darius growled, his voice a low, vibrating hum that seemed to rattle the heavy wooden doors of the ward. "I am paying you $50 million to fix her, Dr. Peterson." "Money cannot rewrite human biology, sir," Peterson said gently, though his voice trembled. "Her kidneys are failing. Her liver enzymes are off the charts. We are putting her on dialysis today, but you need to prepare yourself. We are running out of medical options." Darius turned away, his jaw clenched so tight the bone threatened to snap. He stalked back into the room. Chloe was asleep, the rhythmic beep, beep, beep of the heart monitor the only proof she was still tethered to the world. He had tried the ultimate taboo. 2 nights ago, when the nurses were gone, Darius had bitten his own wrist, pressing his bleeding flesh to Chloe's pale lips. Vampire blood healed mortals. It could cure cancer, mend broken bones, and reverse aging. It was the ultimate failsafe. But when his blood slipped past her lips, Chloe had convulsed. She had begun to scream in agony, violently throwing up black necrotic fluid. The poison in her veins had been specifically synthesized to turn vampire blood into battery acid. Whoever had dosed her knew exactly what Darius would try. They had trapped him. The king of the East, capable of slaughtering hundreds in the blink of an eye, was entirely powerless to save the soft, plump baker who held his heart. Darius sat on the edge of the bed, burying his face in Chloe's soft stomach. She stirred her hand weakly, coming up to stroke his dark hair. "Darius," she rasped. "I am here. I am right here, my sweet girl," he choked out, the immortal king weeping into the silk hospital gown. "Don't cry," she whispered, her fingers tracing the sharp curve of his ear. "I've had a good life. I made the best brioche in Brooklyn, and I got to be loved by you. Do not speak like this is the end," Darius commanded, though his voice broke. "I am tearing the city apart. Gideon is searching for the cure. We will find whoever did this." Chloe managed a weak, sad smile. She knew the truth, even if he refused to accept it. Her body, the soft, round vessel she had spent years learning to love, was shutting down. The heavy weight in her chest, the numbness in her thick thighs, the fog in her brain. It was the quiet, undeniable approach of the end. "Promise me something," Chloe said, her breathing shallow. "Anything. Don't burn the world down when I'm gone," she pleaded, her hazel eyes locking onto his. "You have so much anger in you, Dar. I used to feel it when we first met, but you've been so gentle with me. Don't let them turn you back into a monster. Promise me." Darius kissed her forehead, tasting the salt of her sweat and the bitter tang of the poison. "I promise," he lied. Outside the hospital room, shadows lengthened in the corridors. Unbeknownst to Darius, the architect of this tragedy was standing right down the hall. Gideon Shaw, Darius's trusted second-in-command, watched the door of room 412 with cold, calculating eyes. Gideon despised humans. He despised the fact that his king had chosen a mortal and a fat common baker at that to be his queen. To Gideon, Chloe was an embarrassment to their ancient bloodline. The poison was his masterpiece, and it was finally reaching its climax. It happened on a Tuesday at 4:18 p.m. The rain was lashing against the reinforced glass windows of the Bellevue VIP suite. Darius had stepped out for exactly 3 minutes. He had gone to the private waiting area to interrogate one of his spies over a secured phone line, desperate for a lead on the poison's origin. He was in the middle of a sentence when he heard the alarm. It wasn't the slow, rhythmic beeping he had grown accustomed to. It was a solid, piercing, relentless tone that froze the blood in his veins. "Code Blue, room 412, Code Blue." Darius dropped the phone. He moved faster than human eyes could track, a blur of motion that bypassed the security detail and burst through the heavy oak doors of Chloe's room. The scene was a nightmare of organized chaos. Dr. Peterson was straddling Chloe's plush, unresponsive body, delivering brutal chest compressions. 2 nurses, Brenda and Sarah, were desperately pushing epinephrine into her IV lines and attaching the defibrillator pads to her pale, soft chest. "Clear!" Dr. Peterson shouted. Chloe's body jerked off the mattress, a sickening, lifeless arch, before slamming back down. The monitor continued its flat, endless screech. Darius was paralyzed. For a man who had fought in the Crusades, who had watched empires rise and fall in fire and blood, the sight of his mate slipping away reduced him to a helpless child. He tried to step forward, but the medical team was a wall of frantic motion. "Come on, Chloe, stay with us," Dr. Peterson muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. "Charge to 200. Clear." Another violent jolt, another horrifyingly flat line. "Push another milligram of epi," Peterson ordered, his voice cracking. He resumed chest compressions, his hands pressing deep into Chloe's chest. "Stop," Darius whispered, his voice trembling. He could hear it, or rather he couldn't hear it. The quiet, steady, beautiful drumbeat of Chloe's heart, the sound he listened to every night as he held her, was gone. "Doc, it's been 35 minutes of resuscitation," Nurse Brenda said softly, tears in her own eyes. "Her pupils are fixed and dilated." Dr. Peterson stopped compressions. He stepped back, his shoulders slumping in absolute defeat. He looked at the monitor, then down at the beautiful, tragically still woman on the bed. He checked his watch. He turned to Darius, pulling down his mask. "Time of death, 4:53 p.m. Peterson's voice was hollow. "I am so incredibly sorry, Mr. Kensington. We did everything we could. She is dead." The words hung in the sterile air, suspended like a guillotine blade before the drop. "She is dead." Darius didn't scream. He didn't cry. Instead, he dropped to his knees. And then the king's grief breached the boundaries of his flesh. It started as a low rumble like a subway train passing directly beneath their feet, but it didn't stop. The floor of the hospital ward began to vibrate violently. Dr. Peterson stumbled backward, grabbing a cart for support. "Earthquake," Nurse Sarah shrieked in panic. But it wasn't an earthquake. It was Darius. The immortal power he kept tightly coiled beneath his human facade erupted. A wave of concussive, invisible force blasted outward from his kneeling form. Crack. The massive, reinforced panoramic windows of the VIP suite, designed to withstand hurricane-force winds, exploded simultaneously. A shower of razor-sharp glass blew outward into the Manhattan sky, letting the roaring wind and rain tear into the room. Crash. The fluorescent light fixtures above them shattered into a million pieces, plunging the room into shadows, save for the flashing red light of the flatlining monitor. The massive medical machines short-circuited, sparking violently as the supernatural energy fried their motherboards. "Get out!" Dr. Peterson yelled to the nurses, realizing with a sudden primitive terror that the man on the floor was doing this. The air pressure in the room had dropped so severely that their eardrums popped. The temperature plummeted from a comfortable 70 degrees to freezing in a matter of seconds. Frost immediately began to form on the edges of the shattered windows and the metallic bed frames. Darius stood up slowly. His eyes were no longer grey. They were pitch-bleeding black, glowing with a demonic, predatory light that made the humans in the room cower against the far wall. His fangs had descended sharp and lethal. He walked over to the bed, ignoring the terrified medical staff. He looked down at Chloe. In death, the pain had finally left her face. She looked like she was sleeping. He reached out his trembling, blood-stained fingers, tracing the soft curve of her cheek. She was already growing cold. As he leaned in to press one final kiss to her neck, his enhanced senses caught something. Beneath the sharp scent of antiseptic blood and the ozone of the shattered machines, he smelled it. The poison had metabolized, leaving its final signature on her skin as she died. It was the distinct, unmistakable scent of nightshade and silver ash, a mixture that only one vampire in his entire inner circle knew how to brew. "Gideon." Darius's head snapped up, looking toward the door. The grief that was tearing him apart instantly calcified into something infinitely more dangerous. Pure, unadulterated, psychopathic wrath. He looked back at the terrified doctor and the nurses huddled in the corner. "Leave this room," Darius commanded, his voice a demonic, echoing roar that shook the very foundations of the building. "Before I kill you all!" They fled, scrambling over the debris. Darius looked down at his beautiful, plump mate, his heart shattering into 1,000 irredeemable pieces. He kissed her cold lips. "I am sorry I broke my promise, my love," he whispered into the dark, rain-swept room. "But I am going to burn this entire world to ash." He turned toward the door, stalking out into the ruined hallway, ready to hunt. The storm that raged outside Bellevue Hospital was nothing compared to the cataclysm walking down its corridors. Darius Kensington moved with a terrifying, preternatural stillness. He did not run, kings did not run, but the ground seemed to swallow the distance beneath his bespoke Oxford shoes, propelling him toward the private underground parking garage with lethal efficiency. He pulled a matte black satellite phone from his tailored suit jacket. The device was encrypted with military-grade software, a direct line to his private security and intelligence firm Aegis Defense Lines. A human voice answered on the first ring. "Mr. Kensington." "Status?" asked Commander Arthur Vance. "No, let's call him Commander Arthur Bradley, the former JSOC operative who ran Darius's daylight operations. "I need a complete lockdown of the 5 boroughs," Darius commanded, his voice devoid of all warmth, sounding like stone grinding against stone. "I want Palantir Gotham tracking software, running facial recognition on every MTA camera Every toll booth and every private ATM from Manhattan to Montauk. Ground all flights out of JFK, LaGuardia, and Newark. I am buying the airspace." Bradley paused. The request was legally impossible, violating dozens of federal laws. "Sir, the FAA. I will personally wire $200 million to the offshore accounts of the regional FAA directors within the next 60 seconds. Darius interrupted smoothly, the numbers meaning absolutely nothing to a man who had accumulated wealth since the Renaissance. "Do it, Bradley, and deploy the Blood Guard to Teterboro Airport. Someone is going to try to fly out privately." "Who are we hunting, sir?" Darius's fangs extended slightly, grazing his lower lip until a bead of crimson blood swelled. "Gideon Shaw." There was a heavy silence on the line. Gideon was the second in command, but Bradley knew better than to question the king. "Consider it done." Darius slid into the driver's seat of his reinforced Mercedes Maybach S680. The V12 engine roared to life, a mechanical beast echoing the wrath of its master. As he tore out of the garage and onto FDR Drive, the memories of Chloe assaulted him unbidden and agonizing. He remembered the first time she had stayed the night at his penthouse overlooking Central Park. She had been so incredibly nervous, wrapping herself tightly in his massive silk comforter, acutely aware of her size 22 frame in a world that idolized starvation. Darius had gently pulled the blanket away, his cold marble hands sliding over her soft, dimpled thighs, reverently tracing the generous swell of her hips and the beautiful plush curve of her stomach. "I'm not built like the women in your world, Darius," she had whispered, her cheeks burning pink, her hazel eyes looking down. "Thank God for that," he had replied, pressing his face to her soft belly, inhaling the intoxicating scent of yeast vanilla and her sweet, vibrant blood. "My world is starved, Chloe. My world is sharp, cold, and dead. You are the only thing in my centuries of existence that has ever felt like home." And now that home was lying on a cold steel table in a hospital morgue, his grip on the steering wheel tightened until the carbon fiber and leather cracked under his inhuman strength. Gideon, the traitor, was arrogant, but he wasn't stupid. He knew that the moment Chloe died, the metabolic breakdown of the poison would release its distinct scent. Gideon would already be moving. At Teterboro Airport in New Jersey, a sleek, unmarked Gulfstream G650 was spooling its engines on the rain-slicked tarmac. Gideon Shaw stood at the bottom of the air stairs, pulling the collar of his trench coat up against the driving rain. He was a creature of refined, cruel elegance, with sharp cheekbones and eyes the color of bruised ice. He checked his Patek Philippe watch. It was time to go. By the time Darius finished mourning his pathetic, overweight mortal, Gideon would be in the Carpathian Mountains rallying the traditionalist vampire covens who despised Darius's modern, human-sympathizing rule. "Sir, we have a problem," the human pilot yelled over the roar of the jet engines, leaning out of the cabin door. "The tower just revoked our clearance. All private airspace is closed. They're citing a sudden massive weather anomaly, but air traffic control is entirely unresponsive to our bypass codes." Gideon's eyes narrowed. "Darius," he hissed under his breath. He had underestimated the speed of the king's grief. Before Gideon could command the pilot to take off anyway, the perimeter fences of the private airfield were breached. 5 matte black tactical SUVs tore onto the tarmac, their high beams cutting through the torrential rain, forming a blinding semicircle around the Gulfstream. Armed mercenaries from Aegis defense lines poured out, but they weren't there to fight. They were there to corral. From the center of the blockade, Darius's Maybach rolled to a slow, menacing halt. Gideon didn't run. There was no outrunning a king of the blood. He stood his ground, letting his own fangs descend his fingernails, lengthening into razor-sharp talons. The door of the Maybach opened. Darius stepped out into the rain. He didn't bother with an umbrella. The water soaked his bespoke suit, matting his dark hair to his forehead. His eyes were no longer the calm, icy gray of a billionaire CEO. They were entirely black, swimming with a demonic, predatory void. "Gideon," Darius said. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. His voice projected over the roaring jet engines, vibrating with a dark, ancient magic that made the human mercenaries fall to their knees, clutching their bleeding ears. "You're late, Darius," Gideon sneered, stepping away from the plane. "I assumed you'd be too busy weeping over the fat baker's corpse to notice my departure." In a fraction of a millisecond, the space between them vanished. A sonic boom shattered the windows of the nearby hangars as Darius crossed the 60 yards of tarmac faster than the speed of sound. His hand wrapped around Gideon's throat with the force of a hydraulic press. The impact lifted Gideon off his feet, and Darius slammed him backward into the fuselage of the Gulfstream with such cataclysmic violence that the aircraft's aluminum hull crumpled inward, the landing gear screaming under the shifted weight. Gideon choked his hands, clawing desperately at Darius's iron grip. "Why?" Darius's voice was a terrifying whispered rasp. The sheer density of his aura was suffocating, freezing the rain into hail before it even touched their skin. Because she was a disgrace. Gideon spat a mixture of blood and venom leaking from his lips. He refused to cower, his pure-blood arrogance shielding him from the reality of his impending death. You are the king of the eastern seaboard. You have walked this earth for 400 years. You could have had the finest, most elegant, pure-blood queens. You could have commanded goddesses, and instead you debased our entire lineage by claiming immortal. Darius tightened his grip, hearing the satisfying crack of Gideon's cervical vertebrae fracturing. She was my mate. She was cattle. Gideon roared, his face contorting in disgust. A soft, doughy, pathetic human who couldn't even walk up a flight of stairs without losing her breath. She embarrassed us, Darius. I watched you commission custom silk dresses for her because she was too fat to fit into the royal wardrobe. I watched you hold her thick hands in front of the High Council. You made us the laughingstock of the immortal world. Darius didn't yell. His grief had moved past explosive anger into a terrifying surgical coldness. You measured her worth by the space she took up, Darius said softly, his black eyes staring into Gideon's soul. You looked at her softness and saw weakness, but she had more strength in her warm, beautiful heart than you possess in your entire immortal existence. She loved fiercely, she lived brightly, and you snuffed her out because of your own pathetic vanity. Darius raised his free hand. He didn't use a weapon. He didn't need one. He drove his hand directly into Gideon's chest, shattering the sternum, his fingers burying deep into the traitor's cold, dead flesh. Gideon let out a horrific gurgling scream as Darius's hand closed around his undead heart. Nightshade and silver ash, Darius murmured, twisting his wrist slightly, enjoying the spasm of absolute agony that wrecked Gideon's face. A brilliant poison, highly untraceable until the moment of death. But you made a mistake, Gideon. You underestimated my desperation. Gideon's eyes widened in sudden dawning terror. What did you do? I gave her my blood, Darius confessed softly. 2 nights ago, I tried to heal her. Gideon let out a wet, rattling laugh, though his eyes were wide with a sudden frantic realization. You fool! You arrogant fool! You didn't tell the human doctors. Tell them what? Darius demanded, twisting his grip. The silver ash. Gideon coughed up a thick stream of black blood. It was designed to kill a mortal, but silver ash reacts. It reacts violently to ancient vampire blood. If she died with your blood in her veins, the poison wouldn't let her pass into death. Darius froze, his non-existent breath caught in his throat. Explain. It crystallizes the heart. Gideon gasped, a sick smile spreading across his bloody lips. It forces the body into a necrotic stasis. The mortal machines, the doctors, they would read it as death. The organs shut down, the brain activity ceases. But the vampire blood, your blood, is trapped inside, fighting the silver ash. It's a war inside her veins. She isn't dead. Darius's voice shook the first crack in his monstrous facade. Oh, she is dead to the world, Gideon sneered maliciously. And she won't wake up. The stasis is permanent unless the blood wins. But it can't, not while she's frozen, which is why I paid the Bellevue morgue technician, a lovely human named Richard, $1 million. Darius's blood ran colder than the ice storm around them. Protocol dictates an autopsy for unexplained poisonings, Gideon whispered, his vision fading as Darius crushed his heart tighter. But Richard is going to bypass the autopsy. He's going to put her thick, heavy body directly into the crematorium. The flames will destroy the blood. She will burn to ash, Darius. She's scheduled for incineration at 6 p.m. Darius dropped Gideon to the tarmac, his mind reeling. He checked his watch. 5:48 p.m. He had 12 minutes. You lose, King, Gideon wheezed on the ground, grinning through bloody teeth. Darius looked down at the traitor. Without a word, he stomped his heel down with the force of a falling meteor, obliterating Gideon's skull into the wet concrete. The king didn't look back. He vanished into the rain, moving faster than he ever had in his 4 centuries of life, leaving his mercenaries and his ruined car behind. He ran through the storm, a shadow tearing across the Hudson River, his mind focused entirely on the beautiful, soft woman trapped in the dark. The basement level of Bellevue Hospital was a stark, clinical world of stainless steel, humming refrigerators, and the overwhelming smell of formaldehyde and bleach. Richard, the senior morgue technician, hummed a quiet tune as he typed on his computer. He was a man deeply in debt to underground bookies, and the anonymous briefcase holding $1 million in non-sequential bills currently sitting under his desk was a literal lifesaver. All he had to do was incinerate Jane Doe number 412, Chloe Henderson, immediately citing a biohazard contamination risk to bypass the medical examiner's mandated autopsy. He looked over at the steel table in the center of the room. Chloe lay there, stripped of her silk gown, covered only by a thin white sheet. Her body was pale, her lips tinged with a faint, tragic blue. Richard, despite his corruption, felt a pang of genuine sorrow. She was young, and despite the cruelty of the world above, he thought she looked beautiful. Her curves, her soft stomach, the plushness of her thighs. She looked like a Renaissance painting, tragically rendered in the cold, harsh light of the morgue. *555 p.m. "Sorry, sweetheart," Richard muttered to himself. "Nothing personal." He walked over to the massive industrial crematorium built into the far wall. He hit the heavy green button. The internal gas jets roared to life, preheating the chamber to a blistering 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. The low, ominous rumble filled the quiet basement. He wheeled Chloe's table toward the open maw of the furnace. The heat rolling off the open doors was suffocating. He locked the wheels, preparing to slide the metal tray carrying her body into the flames. "Forgive me," Richard whispered, grabbing the handles of the tray. Crash. The reinforced steel doors of the morgue didn't just open. They were ripped off their heavy iron hinges, flying across the room and embedding themselves into the concrete wall. Richard screamed, dropping the tray handles and falling backward. Standing in the doorway was a nightmare. Darius Kensington was drenched in freezing rain and coated in the black blood of his traitor. His chest was heaving, his eyes burning with a terrifying luminescent crimson light. The sheer atmospheric pressure radiating from him caused the glass beakers on the nearby counters to shatter simultaneously. Darius didn't even look at the terrified technician. His eyes locked entirely on the steel tray, inches away from the roaring flames of the incinerator. In a blur of motion, Darius was there. He violently shoved the heavy metal tray backward away from the heat, the screech of metal on metal echoing through the basement. He stood between Chloe and the fire, panting, his cold hands trembling as he reached out to her. He pulled the white sheet away. She was so cold. Her beautiful, soft skin, which usually radiated a comforting, oven-warm heat, was like marble. But as Darius placed his hand over the center of her chest, right above her heart, he felt it. It wasn't a heartbeat. It was a vibration, a violent, microscopic war raging beneath her ribs. The ancient predatory magic of his blood was clashing violently against the necrotic magic of the silver ash poison. Gideon was right. She was trapped in a stasis. The poison had crystallized her heart, stopping its mortal function, but his blood was refusing to let her soul depart. "Richard," Darius said softly, not turning around. The technician was scrambling backward toward the exit, weeping in terror. "I'm sorry, I didn't know they just paid me." "Leave," Darius commanded, "and if you ever speak of what you saw, I will pull your spine out through your throat." Richard scrambled to his feet and ran, abandoning his $1,000,000 bribe. Darius was left alone with his mate and the roaring fire. He gently scooped Chloe into his arms. Even in death, she was heavy, substantial, a beautiful solid weight that anchored him to the earth. He held her soft body against his chest, burying his face in the crook of her neck. "I am here, my sweet girl," he whispered, his fangs grazing her icy collarbone. "I am going to bring you back, but you have to fight. You have to let my blood win." He knew what he had to do. The silver ash was a freezing agent designed to induce necrosis. To break the crystallization around her heart, he had to shock her system with pure, unadulterated vampire energy and heat. Darius carried Chloe toward the open doors of the crematorium. The 1,800-degree heat licked at his suit, singeing the edges of his expensive fabric. For a vampire, fire was a lethal enemy, but Darius was an ancient. He could withstand it at least for a few moments. He stepped up to the precipice of the flames, holding Chloe tight against him. He bit down hard on his own wrist, tearing open a massive vein. He pressed his bleeding wrist directly to Chloe's pale lips, forcing his pure, potent, ancient blood into her mouth. Then, drawing on every ounce of his 400-year-old power, Darius began to channel his dark energy, raising his own internal body temperature. He became a living furnace, his skin flushing a dangerous glowing red. He wrapped his body entirely around hers, pressing his burning chest against her frozen one, enveloping her soft, plump form in an embrace of absolute, desperate fire. "Come back to me," he commanded into the roaring heat of the room. "Fight it, Chloe." For a long, agonizing minute, nothing happened. The heat from the incinerator threatened to blister his back, but Darius didn't move an inch. He poured his life force into her, his ancient blood surging down her throat, attacking the poison with the ferocity of a starving wolf. And then, a sound. Crack. It was a sharp internal sound, like ice splintering under a heavy boot. Beneath his chest, Darius felt something shift. The rigid, crystallized hardness of her heart began to fracture. His blood, supercharged by his immense power and the surrounding heat, had finally broken the stalemate. It flooded her heart, washing away the silver ash, replacing her sluggish, dying mortal blood with the immortal, predatory ichor of a king. Thump! Darius froze, pulling his face back to look at her. Thump! 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 Her heart began to beat, not with the slow, steady rhythm of a mortal baker, but with the rapid, thunderous, powerful drumbeat of a newborn immortal. Chloe's body suddenly arched in his arms. She let out a gasping, ragged breath, inhaling the smell of smoke and blood. The pallor of death vanished from her skin, replaced by a radiant, flushed, unnaturally vibrant glow. Her soft, plump fingers dug into his shoulders with sudden, bone-crushing strength, a strength she had never possessed before. Darius lowered her gently back onto the steel table, his own chest heaving. Chloe's eyelids fluttered. She groaned, a deep, raspy sound that held a new predatory resonance. She turned her head, coughing up a final black speck of the neutralized poison before settling back against the metal. Slowly, her eyes opened. They were no longer the warm, gentle hazel of the woman who baked cinnamon brioche. They were a brilliant, piercing, luminous gold ringed with a deep, hungry crimson. She looked at the ceiling, then at her own hands, flexing her fingers. She looked down at her body, tracing the soft curves of her stomach, realizing that she was exactly the same, plump, soft, and beautifully full, but fundamentally entirely different. Her senses were exploded open. She could hear the hum of the electricity in the walls. She could hear a rat scurrying 3 floors above them, and she could smell blood. She looked up at Darius. He was covered in soot rain and blood, looking at her with a mixture of absolute awe and profound relief. "Darius," she whispered. Her voice was richer, darker, vibrating with power. "I am here, my queen," he said, dropping to his knees beside the steel table, taking her soft hand and pressing it to his cheek. Tears, real hot tears, finally leaked from the corners of his eyes. Chloe sat up. The hospital sheet fell away. She didn't feel self-conscious anymore. She felt invincible. She swung her thick legs over the side of the table, her bare feet touching the cold concrete floor. She looked at the blood drying on Darius's neck. A sudden sharp pain erupted in her gums. 2 elongated razor-sharp fangs descended, grazing her bottom lip. She looked at her king, her golden eyes blazing with a terrifying, beautiful hunger. "I'm starving," she whispered. The basement morgue of Bellevue Hospital was a graveyard of shattered glass and ruined medical equipment bathed in the hellish, flickering orange glow of the open crematorium. The 1,800-degree heat rolling out of the furnace should have driven them to the brink of madness, but to Chloe Henderson, it felt like nothing more than a warm summer breeze. She sat on the edge of the steel autopsy table, her plush, substantial body illuminated by the fire. The thin, white hospital sheet had slipped to the floor, leaving her bare, but the agonizing self-consciousness that used to plague her human existence was entirely eradicated. She looked down at her thick thighs, the soft, generous swell of her stomach, and the heavy curves of her breasts. She was exactly the same size 22 baker who had walked into the hospital 3 weeks ago. But everything was fundamentally, terrifyingly different. Her skin, once prone to bruising and exhaustion, now possessed the flawless, indestructible density of diamond, while retaining its warm, doughy softness. The chronic ache in her lower back was gone. The heavy sluggishness that accompanied the poison was replaced by an electric thrumming current of pure, ancient violence. She inhaled deeply, and the world fractured into a million microscopic data points. She could smell the ozone from the broken lights, the sterile tang of formaldehyde, the sweat left behind by the terrified technician, and something else. Something that made the newfound fangs in her mouth ache with an unbearable predatory desperation. She looked at Darius. The king of the eastern seaboard was on his knees before her. His bespoke $10,000 suit was ruined, singed by the flames, and soaked in the black necrotic blood of his former second-in-command. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, yet to Chloe he had never looked more magnificent. "I'm starving," Chloe repeated, her voice dropping an octave, vibrating with a dark, melodic resonance that made the concrete walls hum. Darius didn't hesitate. He stripped off his ruined suit jacket, throwing it onto the floor, and rolled up the sleeve of his white dress shirt. He brought his wrist to his own mouth and bit down viciously, tearing open the thick, immortal vein. Crimson blood, rich with 4 centuries of power, welled up and spilled over his pale skin. He held his bleeding arm out to her. "Drink, my queen. Take everything you need." Chloe didn't possess the timid restraint of a human anymore. The newborn vampire hunger was a feral, consuming beast. She lunged forward, grabbing his forearm with a grip that would have shattered a mortal's bones. Her soft lips locked over the torn flesh of his wrist, and she drank. The moment the king's blood hit her tongue, It was like swallowing a supernova. It was richer than the finest dark chocolate, warmer than spiced rum, and practically vibrated with ancient magic. It filled the hollow, desperate void in her chest, repairing the lingering microscopic damage left by the silver ash poison, weaving her human soul permanently into her immortal flesh. She drank with a ravenous, messy enthusiasm, letting out a soft, predatory moan that sent a jolt of pure desire straight down Darius's spine. For minutes, the only sound in the ruined morgue was the roaring of the crematorium and the wet, desperate sounds of her feeding. Finally, Chloe pulled back, gasping. A trail of crimson stained her chin and her plush lips. Her golden eyes, ringed in red, flared with magnificent, terrifying life. Darius looked up at her, utterly spellbound. He reached out with a trembling, blood-stained hand, gently wiping the crimson from her chin. "How do you feel?" he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion that bordered on religious reverence. Chloe stood up. She didn't wobble. She didn't feel the familiar pull of gravity on her heavy frame. She felt weightless. She walked over to the reinforced steel door that Darius had ripped from its hinges. It weighed at least 600 pounds. Chloe reached down with one hand, her thick fingers gripping the cold metal, and effortlessly lifted it off the floor. She tossed it aside like it was a piece of cardboard. The heavy door slammed into the far wall, embedding itself deep into the concrete with a deafening crash. Chloe turned back to Darius, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. "I feel like I could tear Manhattan apart with my bare hands," she breathed. Darius stood up, his eyes turning obsidian black with raw, possessive pride. He walked toward her, his gaze sweeping over every generous curve, every soft dimple, every inch of the plush body he worshipped. "You are magnificent," he murmured, pulling her flush against his chest. His hands roamed over her wide hips, gripping her with a desperate intensity. "I thought I lost you. I watched you die, Chloe." The machines flatlined. Your heart stopped. Chloe wrapped her thick arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. "I heard you," she whispered, the fierce vampire energy suddenly softening into profound love. "I was trapped in the dark. It was so cold, but I heard you roaring. I felt your heat. You burned the poison out of me, Dar." "Gideon is dead," Darius stated, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. "I crushed his skull on the tarmac at Teterboro. He was the one who poisoned you." Chloe pulled back, her golden eyes narrowing. The mention of the traitor ignited a sudden explosive anger in her newly immortal chest. "Why? Because of me," Darius admitted, his expression hardening. "He despised the fact that I chose immortal. He despised that you were human, that you didn't fit the fragile aristocratic mold of our society. He thought you were a weakness." A dark, resonant laugh escaped Chloe's lips. It wasn't the warm, bubbly laugh of the Brooklyn baker. It was the laugh of an apex predator. "Oh, weakness," she repeated, looking down at her solid, heavily built body. She clenched her fists, feeling the indestructible density of her muscles. "Did he act alone?" "No," Darius said, his voice dropping into a lethal register. "Gideon was arrogant, but he wasn't a master chemist. The traditionalist faction backed him. Lord Victor, Lady Beatrice, and Dominic. They supplied the silver ash. They wanted you dead, so they could break my mind, usurp the throne, and plunge the city back into the dark ages of hunting mortals in the streets." Chloe's eyes flashed crimson. The very thought of these ancient, snobbish monsters looking down on her, trying to murder her because of her size and her humanity, fueled a terrifying new wrath. "Where are they right now?" Chloe asked, her voice eerily calm. "They believe you are ash in this furnace," Darius replied, glancing at the roaring fire. "And they believe I am a broken, weeping widower wandering the storm. Tonight is the blood moon. They are holding a secret summit at the Belvedere Castle in Central Park to officially declare me unfit to rule and crown Victor." Darius walked over to a metal storage cabinet, ripping the steel doors open. He found an oversized black medical scrub suit. It wasn't couture, but it would cover her. He handed it to her, his fingers brushing against hers. "We are going to Teterboro," Darius told her softly. "I am putting you on a jet to my stronghold in Switzerland. You will be safe there while I return to the city and slaughter every single vampire who knew about this treason." Chloe took the scrubs, slipping them over her soft, powerful body. The fabric stretched tight over her curves. She looked at Darius, her jaw set. "No," Chloe said. Darius blinked, taken aback. In 400 years, no one ever told him no in that tone of voice. "Chloe, you are a newborn. You are powerful, but you don't know how to fight immortals. They have centuries of combat experience." Chloe stepped into his personal space. She was shorter than him, but she carried the absolute authority of an earthquake. She poked a thick, indestructible finger into his chest. They tried to murder me because they thought I was a soft, fat, weak little human. Chloe snarled, her fangs descending. They poisoned me. They put me on a steel table. They made you cry, Darius. No one makes my husband cry. Darius felt a shiver of absolute, unadulterated arousal rip through him. I am not hiding in Switzerland, Chloe commanded, her golden eyes locking onto his. I am the queen of the eastern seaboard, and tonight I am going to show Lord Victor exactly how much space I take up. A slow, terrifying, deeply devoted smile spread across the king's face. He bowed his head, kissing the knuckles of her heavy hand. As you command, my queen. The storm raging over Manhattan had intensified into a torrential hurricane, masking the approach of the king's motorcade. Deep within Central Park, the historic Belvedere Castle had been commandeered by the elite traditionalist vampire faction. The mortal security guards had been brutally slaughtered, their bodies tossed into the murky waters of the Turtle Pond. Inside the grand, stone-walled main hall, lit only by hundreds of flickering black candles, 50 of the most powerful pure-blood vampires in North America were gathered. They were dressed in impeccable, archaic finery, velvet suits, corseted silk gowns dripping in stolen diamonds. Standing at the head of a massive mahogany table was Lord Victor. He was tall, gaunt, and possessed a cruel, aristocratic beauty. Beside him stood Lady Beatrice, a terrifyingly fast assassin, and Dominic, a massive brute of a vampire, who served as the faction's enforcer. Brothers and sisters, Victor announced, his voice echoing off the stone walls. He raised a crystal goblet filled with human blood. Tonight we mourn the fall of our king. Darius Kensington has lost his mind. His pathetic, overweight mortal pet has finally perished, succumbing to a mysterious illness. A dark collective chuckle rippled through the room. Darius has abandoned his post, Victor continued, his eyes gleaming with ambition. He is wandering the rain, shattered by grief over a creature who was fit only for the slaughterhouse. He has disgraced our bloodline by treating cattle as royalty. Therefore, by the ancient rights of the Blood Council, I declare his reign over. Victor raised his goblet higher. I claim the throne of the East. All hail, King Victor, Dominic roared, raising a massive broadsword. The crowd erupted into cheers, raising their glasses. The sound of their victory echoed through the castle, a triumphant roar of pure blood supremacy. And then the heavy, iron-reinforced oak doors of the castle exploded. It wasn't a dramatic push. The doors were literally blown into 1,000 splinters by a concussive wave of sheer, terrifying kinetic energy. The shockwave swept through the hall, extinguishing every single candle in an instant. The room plunged into absolute darkness, save for the sudden, violent lightning flashing outside. The cheering stopped instantly. The purebloods hissed, dropping their goblets, drawing swords, and extending their claws, their eyes glowing red in the dark. From the shadows of the ruined entryway, a figure stepped forward. Darius Kensington. He had not bothered to change his clothes. He was still wearing the ruined, blood-soaked trousers and the white shirt stained with Gideon's gore and his own ancient blood. He was entirely unarmed, but the sheer crushing weight of his aura dropped the ambient temperature of the room to below freezing. Frost crawled up the stone walls in jagged, creeping veins. Victor, Darius said. His voice wasn't loud, but it resonated in the marrow of every vampire present, a frequency of pure, unfiltered death. You are sitting in my chair. Victor swallowed hard, but he held his ground. He had 50 warriors behind him. Darius was alone. You are unfit, Darius, Victor shouted, rallying his courage. You are broken. Your human is ash in a Bellevue incinerator, and Gideon is miles away rallying the West. You have lost. Gideon's brain matter is currently washing down a Teterboro storm drain, Darius replied coldly, his black eyes fixing on the usurper. And as for my queen, Darius stepped aside. From the storm outside, a second figure entered the castle. The collective breath of the 50 purebloods caught in their throats. Chloe stepped into the hall. She was no longer wearing the oversized medical scrubs. In the hour it took to reach the park, Darius had his personal tailor unlock their flagship boutique under threat of death. Chloe was dressed in a custom skin-tight gown of crushed black velvet that perfectly, unapologetically hugged her massive curves. The dress featured a deep, plunging neckline that highlighted her generous bust and a thigh-high slit that showcased her thick, powerful legs. Her dark hair cascaded over her shoulders in wild, damp waves. But it wasn't her size that terrified the room. It was her eyes. They burned with a brilliant predatory gold, laced with the crimson ring of a newborn who had just consumed the blood of an ancient king. The sheer density of her magical aura was staggering. She wasn't just a vampire. She was a juggernaut fueled by centuries of compressed power. Good evening, Victor. Chloe purred, her voice vibrating through the stone floor. I hear you've been talking about my weight behind my back. Victor stepped back, sheer terror breaking his aristocratic composure. Impossible! The silver ash, it crystallizes the heart. She cannot be alive. She isn't, Lady Beatrice hissed, drawing twin daggers. She's an abomination, a fat mortal corpse reanimated by his blood. Kill her. Dominic the Massive Enforcer roared in rage. He launched himself across the room, crossing 60 feet in a fraction of a second. He swung his heavy steel broadsword directly at Chloe's neck, intending to decapitate the newborn before she could even blink. Darius didn't move to protect her. He simply stood there, a proud, lethal smile on his lips. Chloe didn't flinch. As the blade came down at blinding speed, she simply raised her soft, plump arm. Clang! The heavy steel broadsword struck her bare forearm. It didn't cut her. It didn't even leave a scratch. Instead, the force of the impact against her indestructible, diamond-dense flesh caused the sword to shatter into a dozen jagged pieces. Dominic's eyes widened in absolute shock. He looked at the broken hilt in his hand. Chloe looked at her arm, then back at the massive enforcer. She offered him a sickeningly sweet, terrifying smile. My turn. She stepped forward and drove her fist directly into Dominic's chest. She didn't use technique. She used the pure, unstoppable momentum of her substantial mass combined with newborn speed. Her fist punched clean through his sternum, shattering his ribs like dry twigs, and erupted out of his back, clutching his still-beating black heart. The entire hall fell into a horrifying, paralyzed silence. Chloe ripped her arm back, tossing the crushed heart onto the stone floor. Dominic's massive body collapsed at her feet, instantly turning to ash. She casually wiped the blood on her velvet skirt and looked up at the remaining 49 vampires. Anyone else want to critique my diet? She asked. Pandemonium erupted. The purebloods, realizing they were trapped with a vengeful ancient king and his indestructible juggernaut queen, tried to flee, but Darius had already locked down the exits. The massacre that followed was not a battle. It was a surgical, brutal extermination. Darius moved like a blur of black shadow, tearing through the traitors with bare hands, snapping necks, and ripping out throats with the terrifying efficiency of a predator who had spent centuries perfecting the art of murder. He was a force of dark, icy precision, but Chloe was a force of blunt force trauma. She didn't bother dodging. When 3 vampires attacked her simultaneously with silver daggers, she let the blades snap against her soft, impenetrable skin. She grabbed 2 of them by their aristocratic necks, using her heavy, powerful arms to smash their heads together so hard their skulls pulverized into bone dust. Lady Beatrice, realizing physical attacks were useless, tried to use her supernatural speed to flank Chloe. She darted behind the plush queen, aiming a poisoned stake at the base of her spine. Chloe didn't even turn around. She simply backhanded the air behind her. Her thick, heavy fist connected with Beatrice's ribs. The impact sounded like a cannon firing. Beatrice was launched backward with such horrific velocity that when she hit the stone wall of the castle, her body shattered it, leaving a massive, bloody crater in the masonry. Finally, only Victor remained. He was crawling backward across the bloody stone floor. His velvet suit ruined, his arrogance entirely evaporated. He backed against the heavy mahogany table, trembling violently as Darius and Chloe slowly approached him. The king and queen of the East stood side by side, perfectly complementing each other's lethal grace. Darius, tall, lean, and carved from cold marble. Chloe, soft, plush, and radiantly warm, dripping in the blood of her enemies. Please, Victor begged, tears of blood streaming down his face. Darius, I yield the throne. Have mercy. Darius looked at the sniveling lord, his face completely devoid of emotion. He turned his head slightly to look at Chloe. He poisoned you, my love, Darius said, softly deferring to her. His fate belongs to you. Chloe stepped forward. She looked down at the pureblood who had mocked her humanity, who had despised her body, who had forced her to endure the agony of a frozen, crystallized heart. She felt no pity. She reached down, her thick fingers wrapping around the lapels of Victor's suit. With effortless strength, she lifted him entirely off the floor, holding him suspended in the air. You thought my softness made me weak, Chloe whispered, her golden eyes burning into his terrified soul. But softness isn't weakness, Victor. It's room to grow. It's space to carry power, and I carry a lot of it. With a swift, brutal twist of her heavy hands, Chloe ripped Lord Victor's head entirely off his shoulders. She dropped the severed head onto the floor, letting it roll into the shadows before tossing his ash-turning body aside. The purge was complete. The Belvedere castle was silent, save for the howling of the storm outside and the soft crackle of ash settling on the cold stone. Darius walked up behind his queen. He wrapped his long arms around her thick waist, pulling her heavy, gorgeous body back flush against his chest. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling the scent of vanilla rain and fresh blood. I have never been more in love with you than I am in this exact moment, Darius murmured, kissing the pulse point on her indestructible skin. Chloe leaned back into his embrace, sighing happily. The feral rage was subsiding, replaced by a deep, profound peace. I think I'm ready to go home, Da. Anything you want, my queen, the world is yours. 6 months later, Williamsburg, Brooklyn was a neighborhood that prided itself on staying awake, but even the hipsters and night owls knew there was something uniquely special about the newly renovated Chloe's Confections. It no longer opened at 6 a.m. The heavy velvet curtains of the bakery didn't draw back until midnight, and it stayed open until the first rays of dawn threatened the horizon. To the mortal residents of the city, it was just an eccentric, wildly successful late-night bakery that served the best cinnamon brioche and dark chocolate lava cakes in the state. But to the hidden supernatural underground of New York City, it was neutral territory. It was a sanctuary. The bell above the door chimed softly. A young, nervous vampire, barely 20 years into his immortality, stepped out of the freezing rain and into the overpowering warmth of the shop. He looked around in awe. The bakery was thriving. Mortal college students sat in booths hunched over laptops, entirely oblivious to the ancient predators sipping artisanal dark roast coffee at the counter next to them. Behind the massive custom-built oak counter stood the queen. Chloe Henderson was covered in flour. She was wearing a perfectly fitted deep burgundy apron over a black dress, her thick arms moving with a blurred supernatural speed as she kneaded a massive mound of dough. She was laughing, chatting with a mortal customer about the incoming snowstorm, her golden eyes muted to a soft hazel by specialized contact lenses. She was vibrant, she was fat, she was soft, and she was the most terrifyingly powerful creature the young vampire had ever seen. The stories of the Belvedere Massacre had become legendary overnight. The entire immortal hierarchy of North America had fundamentally shifted. The traditionalists, terrified of the juggernaut queen who could shatter broadswords with her bare hands, had immediately fallen into line. The fat-shaming aristocratic snobbery of the high courts vanished, replaced by an absolute paralyzed respect for the baker from Brooklyn. "What can I get you, sweetie?" Chloe asked, pausing her kneading to look at the nervous young vampire. Her smile was blindingly warm. Just a black coffee. Your ma'am," he stammered, bowing slightly. Chloe chuckled, a rich melodic sound. "Just Chloe is fine in the shop, hun. I'll get that for you." As she turned to the espresso machine, the back office door opened. Darius Kensington stepped out. He was dressed flawlessly in a charcoal three-piece suit, a multi-billionaire CEO who looked entirely out of place in a flour-dusted kitchen, yet entirely at home. The young vampire at the counter instantly dropped his gaze, his immortal instincts screaming at the sheer density of the king's presence. Darius ignored the room. He only ever saw her. He walked up behind Chloe, his icy demeanor melting instantly. He wrapped his arms around her plush stomach, pulling her back against him, heedless of the flour transferring to his expensive suit. He kissed the side of her neck, right below her ear. "You've been kneading for 3 hours, Darius murmured, his voice a dark, intimate purr, meant only for her heightened hearing. "Let the staff handle the rest. Come upstairs with me." Chloe leaned her head back against his shoulder, smiling as she poured the espresso. "I have 2 more batches of brioche to finish, Da. The mortals get cranky if I run out before 4 a.m. "Let them be cranky," Darius replied, his cold hands sliding up her ribcage, worshipping the heavy, beautiful curves he had thought he lost. "I am the king of the East. I demand my mate's attention." Chloe turned around in his arms, her flour-covered hands resting on the lapels of his immaculate suit. She looked up at him, her eyes sparkling with profound love and mischievous power. She knew he would burn down the universe just to keep her warm, and she knew she had the strength to build it back up again. 5 minutes, she whispered, leaning up to press a sweet vanilla-scented kiss to his cold lips. "Then I'm all yours, for the rest of eternity." Darius smiled, a genuine, heartbreakingly soft expression that the world rarely saw. He rested his forehead against hers. "Eternity," he agreed softly. "It barely seems long enough." They stood there in the warm, sugar-scented light of the bakery, the ruthless ancient king of shadows and his radiant, unbreakable queen of the hearth. 2 vastly different worlds, perfectly eternally balanced in the dark. What an epic, explosive finale to the tale of Darius and his magnificent queen Chloe. From the heartbreaking despair of the hospital to the terrifying blood-soaked vengeance at Belvedere Castle, Chloe proved that true strength and power come in all shapes and sizes. Her journey from a soft mortal baker to an indestructible juggernaut vampire queen is a romance we will never forget. If you loved this dramatic, twist-filled story of eternal devotion and supernatural revenge, please like this video, share it with your fellow dark romance fans, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling stories.